My husband raised his glass to his friends, that easy smile playing on his lips. She's just a small-town girl. You know, simple, easy to control. The table laughed. I sat right there, a pretty accessory to their joke. 3 weeks later, they drove to that cheap town they were about to acquire. They just did not know every contract, every deed, and every future in that town already belonged to me. My name is Leah Harrington. At least, that is the name engraved on the heavy wedding invitations and the plaques at my husband's charity dinners. My real name, the one that tastes like iron and dirt and hard winters, is Leah Stewart. Tonight, in the penthouse lounge 40 floors above the Chicago skyline, the Harrington name felt like a costume that was 2 sizes too small. The wind hammered silently against the thick glass, a muted backdrop to the sound I hated most, the high, brittle laughter of my husband's inner circle. This was Nathaniel Harrington's heir. Nate, my husband, the financial prodigy who saw the world not as a collection of places and people, but as a series of assets waiting to be leveraged. He was holding court by the fire pit, his profile sharp against the glittering sprawl of the city. He was surrounded by them. Logan, whose family name was stamped on half the buildings we could see. Blake, who treated venture capital like a high-stakes fantasy league. And Madison, blonde and sharp, who had never held a job but sat on 3 different acquisition boards, the trust fund kids. They drank 18-year-old scotch and talked about buying things, companies, islands, politicians. I was standing just outside the gravitational pull of their conversation, nursing a glass of champagne that cost more than my father's first decent suit. I was the accessory, the quiet, pretty, normal wife who anchored Nate, proving he was still grounded despite his billions. Logan leaned in, his voice carrying on the wind. Nate, be honest. We're all friends here. He gestured toward me with the expensive head of his Scotch glass, a lazy, dismissive motion. Did you really marry the small-town girl just to get the authentic rural experience? A little poverty tourism. The circle tightened. The ambient noise of the party seemed to drop away. I felt their eyes on me, curious, amused, clinical. I watched Nate. He had a choice. He could have shut it down. He could have frozen Logan with a look. He could have pulled me in and kissed me. He did not. Nate laughed. It was his boardroom laugh, deep, confident, and utterly dismissive. She's adorable, isn't she? He said, not to me, but to Logan. He turned, giving the group his best profile, but simple. The thinking is just simple. He tapped the side of his own head. Don't worry, I handle all the important stuff. The laughter that followed was louder, relieved. The blood was in the water, and it was mine. I had become the evening's entertainment. Where was it again? Leah Madison chimed in, her voice like splintered ice. She didn't wait for my answer. Somewhere in the Midwest, right? One of those sad little places where everyone gets pregnant at 17 and worships the high school football team. I said nothing. My throat had closed. Nate, my husband, answered for me, performing my life as a charming anecdote. Maple Ridge, cutest little dying spot you've ever seen. He was warming to the topic now, enjoying the spotlight. Her dad had a garage, I think went bust. Of course, total financial disaster. How beautifully tragic, Blake murmured, checking his watch as if my father's bankruptcy was boring him. And her mom, Nate continued, his voice dripping with the false sympathy he used on investors. Worked, 2 jobs? Honey, at the grocery store or something, night shifts. He knew my mother worked 2 jobs. He knew she worked the night shift at the 24-hour convenience store and cleaned houses during the day. He had taken the grit of my childhood, the smell of motor oil on my father's hands, the exhaustion that lived in my mother's bones, the constant humming anxiety of the power being shut off, and he had polished it. He'd turned it into a quaint, harmless story for his rich friends. He had curated my suffering. You're practically a saint. Nate, Madison said, touching his arm, basically a rescue operation. Every word was a joke. Every smile was a lie. And I was the punchline. Logan raised his glass. Well, at least you're finally monetizing the tragedy. This new project of yours, it's in Maple Ridge. Isn't it? My blood went cold. I looked at Nate. This was the first I was hearing of it. We're not just in Maple Ridge, Blake corrected, a predatory grin spreading across his face. We're going to buy the whole damn town. The phrase hung in the icy air. Buy the whole damn town, my town. The streets I learned to ride a bike on. The lake I nearly drowned in. The small cemetery where my grandparents were buried. It's a genius play, Logan boasted, clearly energized by the concept. The land is dirt cheap. The people are desperate. We're going to clear out all those old, run-down shacks. Total teardown. Blake agreed. We're putting in a high-end wellness resort, maybe a small casino, a luxury shopping district for people who actually have money to spend. No more tractor pulls. I must have made a sound. My face must have betrayed the sudden, violent nausea, because Nate finally turned his full attention to me. He stepped over and draped his heavy arm around my shoulders, pulling me into the circle. It was not a gesture of comfort, it was an act of possession. He squeezed, hard, a silent warning. He smiled at his friends, then looked down at me, his voice booming with the false generosity of a king. Honey, look. He patted my shoulder, a gesture one uses on a favored pet. I'm finally going to make that place you ran away from at 18 valuable. The table erupted. This was the pinnacle of the joke. I was not just the wife. I was the cheap souvenir he'd picked up before buying the landmark. I was the before picture in his grand redevelopment scheme. I stood there, trapped in his grip, the champagne glass cold in my hand. The humiliation was no longer a sting. It was a suffocation. It was the sudden, horrifying clarity of my position. I was the prop. It was a human interest story. I was the poor, simple girl he had rescued. And now, as his final act of charity, he would bulldoze my past and sell it for a profit. The pain that usually flooded my chest when they mocked me was gone. It was replaced by something else, something cold, precise, and structural. The mechanism of a heavy lock clicking shut. I looked up at him. I detached myself from his arm, a small, simple movement. I smiled. It was a tiny smile, one that did not reach my eyes. I raised my glass, my hand perfectly, unnervingly steady. The laughter died as they waited for the simple, small-town girl to cry or faint. You're right about one thing. Nate, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind and the chatter. Maple Ridge is definitely going to be memorable. I did not wait for his response. Excuse me. I turned and walked away. I heard my heels click, sharp and even, on the slate floor. I pushed through the heavy glass door, past the curated art in the hallway, and into the women's bathroom. The marble was white and veined with gray, cold as a crypt. The silence was absolute. I gripped the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. Leah Harrington, the simple wife, the rescue case, the woman in the $2,000 dress who had just stood by, mute, while they planned the destruction of her home. They thought I was simple. They thought I was controllable. They thought I was cheap. A new idea, sharp and lethal, sliced through the humiliation. If they see you as a cheap decoration, the one thing they will never, ever see coming is the moment that decoration buys the entire gallery. I pulled my phone from my small clutch. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in the dim light. I ignored the texts from my mother. I ignored the alerts from Nate's social calendar. I opened my email. I scrolled past the party invitations, past the reminders from the decorator. I found the folder I was looking for. It was old, an email from my grandfather's lawyer, sent 5 years ago, just after the funeral. Subject estate of Raymond Stewart. Nate had never asked about my grandfather. He'd just assumed small town meant nothing. He'd never bothered to look. I opened the attachment. It was not just a simple will, it was a list. Deeds, land parcels, mineral rights, water rights. A complex map of assets that covered nearly 30% of the town, including the lakefront and the old quarry. He thought he was buying a dying town. He had no idea I already owned its heart. That night, I did not go back to the party. I did not go home to the penthouse. I checked into a hotel suite under my maiden name, Leah Stewart, and let the email from my grandfather's lawyer sit open on my laptop. Its glow the only light in the dark room, the man Nate Harrington's friends had laughed about. The financial disaster who went bust was my father. But my father was not Raymond Stewart. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a different kind of man entirely. Maple Ridge was not always a dying town. It was just a quiet one. It had a paper mill, a decent high school, and a main street that, for a while, had more open signs than closed ones. Then the mill shut down. It was the old, familiar story of Rust Belt America. The jobs vanished, and the young people, the ones with any spark or ambition, vanished right after them. My father's garage had serviced the mill's trucking fleet. When the mill died, his business bled out slowly and ugly. He was a good mechanic, but a terrible businessman. He trusted everyone, gave credit he could not afford, and ended up with a yard full of dead trucks and a mountain of debt. The bankruptcy broke something in him. He started spending his days on the porch, just watching the weeds grow in the lots across the street. My mother, on the other hand, was forged from something stronger. She took the night shift at the Quick Stop, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., selling cigarettes and stale coffee to truckers. During the day, she cleaned houses for the few families in town who still had money. I grew up in a house that smelled of bleach and exhaustion, ruled by the sound of whispered arguments about the electric bill and the constant fear of a car breaking down. But then there was my grandfather, Raymond Stewart. He was the exception. He was a surveyor, a quiet man who walked the county lines with a notepad and a transit, while everyone else was panicking, selling their homes for pennies on the dollar to move to Ohio or Indiana. Raymond was buying. He was not rich. He just had foresight. He bought the old quarry when it flooded. He bought the abandoned lot behind the high school. He bought acres of useless scrubland up by the highway. He bought the small, forgotten parcels that nobody wanted. His philosophy was simple, and he drilled it into me since I was old enough to walk his property lines with him. Land doesn't disappear. Leah, he would say, his hand resting on a rusted barbed wire fence, it just changes hands, and it always waits. When he died, he left me those parcels, all of them. I was in my late 20s, trying to build a life in Chicago, and I just saw it as a burden. A list of property taxes I barely understood. I had put the file away, embarrassed by the smallness of it all. I was that girl who ran at 18. I got a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs and clawed my way into a state university. I majored in marketing, not because I loved it, but because it sounded like a path to money. I sat in lecture halls next to kids who wore brand-name parkas that cost more than my family's monthly mortgage. I learned to change my accent. I learned to stop talking about where I came from. I was defined by the chip on my shoulder, the constant, grinding feeling that I was an imposter, a small-town girl, just pretending to belong in their world. My first real job was at Skyline Orchard Analytics, a data firm. I was a junior analyst, just a face in a cubicle farm. I was good at my job for one reason: I understood the data. I understood why people in towns like Maple Ridge bought a certain brand of soda, or how they planned their weekly grocery trips, or what value actually meant to them. I understood them because I was them. I met Nate at a startup summit. He was the keynote speaker, a 30-something god in a tailored suit, talking about disruptive technologies. I was just there, assigned to work the registration table for my company. He sought me out afterward. He said he'd overheard me arguing with a colleague about consumer behavior in flyover states. He said I was the first person he'd met all day who wasn't just repeating buzzwords. In those first few months, Nate was intoxicating. He seemed genuinely fascinated by my perspective. He, Logan, and Blake, they understood balance sheets and leveraged buyouts, but they had no idea what made a person with $200 in their bank account choose one brand of laundry detergent over another. I did. My insights, born from a life of scarcity, were novel to him. They were a resource. He lifted me up, as he liked to say. He replaced my off-brand wardrobe with designer labels. He taught me which fork to use. He took me from my tiny studio apartment and moved me into his glass-walled penthouse. In return, I edited my past. I learned to tell the stories he liked. The Maple Ridge I described to him was a charming, harmless place, like a scene from a Hallmark movie. My father's bankruptcy became a career pivot. My mother's double shifts became her incredible work ethic. I polished the grit away until only the quaintness remained. I made my past safe for him. Our wedding was at a vineyard in Napa, a place I had never even heard of before I met him. His guest list was 300 people. Mine was 5. My mother, my father, my aunt, and 2 cousins. I see them in the wedding photos, huddled together near the back. My father's rented suit looking stiff and wrong. They looked like birds that had landed on a strange, hostile shore. I saw their discomfort, but I ignored it. I looked at the string quartet, at the towers of champagne glasses, at the man waiting for me at the altar, and I thought, I made it. I'm safe. I'll never have to worry about the electric bill again. The cracks started small. They always do. It was the little jokes, the ones that stung just enough to make me flinch, but were delivered with a smile so I could never call him out. "You're so cute when you get confused by the wine list. Honey," he'd say at a restaurant, taking it from my hands. "Don't worry, I'll order. Leah's still getting used to city prices." He'd laugh to his friends when I hesitated over a $500 pair of shoes, and the one that always twisted in my gut. "It's a good thing you married me. If you'd stayed in that town, you'd probably be counting ballots at a gas station right now." At first, I laughed along. I told myself it was just a cultural difference. This was how people who grew up with everything talked. They were just teasing. I was being too sensitive. That small-town girl chip on my shoulder was acting up again. But the jokes piled up. They became a wall. I found myself speaking less and less when his friends were around. I would just sit, smile, and nod, becoming the simple, adorable wife he described. I was a supporting character in his life, and my only role was to be grateful. I stared at the laptop in the dark hotel room, the list of my grandfather's properties glowing back at me. I remembered a conversation from about a year ago. Long before tonight, we were driving back from some black tie event, and Nate was complaining about a deal that fell through. He'd stared out the window of the town car, at the dark, sleeping suburbs. "It's all about finding undervalued assets. Leah," he'd mused, "that's the whole game. Find something people think is worthless and just take it." He'd chuckled then, turning to me. "Like that dying town of yours, Maple Ridge. God, what a wreck. Maybe I'll just buy the whole place someday, level it, put up a golf course." I laughed. I touched his arm and said, "Don't be silly, Nate." I thought he was joking. I thought it was just another one of his careless, cruel jokes, but he was not joking. He was just thinking aloud. I returned to the penthouse the next morning. I moved through the vast, silent rooms like a trespasser. Nate had already left for the office. The faint, sharp scent of his cologne the only sign he had been there. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same view that had once made me feel like I had arrived, and felt nothing. The Chicago skyline looked hostile, a wall of glass and steel that held me captive. I was no longer a resident of this life. I was an inmate, and the humiliation from the night before was the rattling of the key in the lock. I went to work. It was the only camouflage I had. My office at Skyline Orchard Analytics was my territory, the one place where the name Leah Stewart, not Harrington, still meant something. I manage a small, specialized team. My official title is Senior Data Strategist, but my real job, my expertise, is mid-market consumer behavior. It is the polite, corporate term for small-town America. I analyze the data that big city firms like Nate's ignore. I track loyalty card usage at regional grocery chains. I build models based on convenience store sales in rural counties. I know why a family in Ohio chooses a certain brand of pickup truck, or how a community in Wisconsin rallies around a local dairy. I understand these people. I know what they value, what they fear, and what they will fight for. I am, professionally, an expert on the very culture my husband finds simple and cheap. Nate always treated my job as a quaint hobby, something to keep me busy. Leah's going to her office to play with her spreadsheets about farmers, he would announce at brunch. He had no idea that my quaint data, the insights I pulled from the lives he mocked, represented a multi-billion-dollar market he was too arrogant to see. The small-town girl nickname had started years ago, long before last night. In the beginning, I had convinced myself it was affectionate, a private joke, but it mutated. It became a tool of control. He wielded it in public, at dinner parties, even in meetings with his partners. If I offered an opinion that ran counter to his, he would smile, that patient, indulgent smile. "That's Leah's small-town girl view on it," he would say, a gentle pat on the head that signaled to everyone in the room, "Do not take this seriously. It is adorable. It is irrelevant." I confronted him about it once, about 6 months ago. We were in the elevator, ascending to the penthouse in a silent, brushed steel box. "Nate, I need you to stop calling me that," I said, my voice quiet but shaking. "It's not funny. It's humiliating." He did not get angry. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, he sighed, a heavy, disappointed sound, as if I had failed a test. He turned, his face a mask of practiced concern, and took both my hands. "Oh, honey, you are being way too sensitive." That was his primary weapon. "You know I am proud of where you come from. I tell everyone, it's part of your story. It's our brand. It's charming." "It doesn't feel charming to me," I insisted. "See?" He dropped my hands, the kindness evaporating, replaced by a cool exasperation. "This is what I mean. You are taking it the wrong way. It's a joke. You just need to learn to take a joke. Leah." The elevator doors opened. I stepped out, silenced. He had done it again. He had taken my genuine pain, twisted it, and handed it back to me as my own personal failing. I was not the one being insulted. I was the one who was too sensitive. I was the one who couldn't take a joke. I was the one who was broken. It spread. His friends, Logan and Blake, had a podcast, a monument to their own egos called Alpha Holdings, where they discussed investments, lifestyle, and real estate. I listened to an episode once, curious. They had Nate on as a guest. Logan asked him about maintaining authenticity in their world, and Nate used me as a marketing tool. He talked about the beautiful challenge of integrating someone from a non-traditional low-income background into his sphere. He called me his greatest personal merger. I sat in my car, in the parking garage of my own office, and listened as my husband described our marriage as a corporate acquisition. I sat through their brunches, listening to Madison complain that the custom-built, climate-controlled doghouse for her New Hamptons property, a property she had purchased exclusively for her 2 golden retrievers, was delayed by 3 weeks. I listened to Blake boast about flying private to Miami for lunch because he was bored, and the restaurants in Chicago were stale. I sat there, the girl whose mother used to cut coupons for canned soup, and I smiled. The gap between our worlds was not a gap. It was a canyon, and I was the only one who could see the terrifying drop. That night, after the party, after the hotel, after my hollow day at the office, I was back in the penthouse. I was a ghost. Nate was in his home office. The heavy oak door opened just a crack. He was on a speakerphone call. His voice energized, victorious. It was Logan. "It is a lock. I'm telling you," Nate said, his voice booming with confidence. "The land is practically free. The entire county is desperate for tax revenue. We are in final talks with the supervisors." "What about the locals?" Logan asked. "Are we going to have a problem? People chaining themselves to bulldozers. And what about Leah? Is she going to be a problem?" I stood perfectly still in the dark hallway, the Italian marble cold beneath my feet. Nate laughed. It was the same deep, dismissive laugh from the rooftop. "The locals. They are small-town people. They have no vision. They will be lining up to hand us the keys for a $50 gift card. They just want a paycheck." "And Leah," Logan pressed. There was a pause, I heard the clink of ice in a glass. Leah is emotional about it. Of course, Nate said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial murmur. She will be. She will cry about her dad's old garage. She will talk about memories. It's fine. He took a drink. I'll handle her. I'll take her to Paris for a week. Buy her another one of those bracelets she likes. She will forget all about it. She always does. I backed away, making no sound. He was not just ignoring my feelings. He was actively factoring them into his business plan. My grief was a line item in his budget. My emotions were a predictable liability that could be handled with a luxury vacation. I walked to my desk. I looked at the shared drive on our home network. I saw a folder he had not bothered to hide. Project Maple Ridge. I opened it. The presentations were full of renderings. Sleek, glass buildings, a casino, a high-end outlet mall, a private airstrip. It was not a revitalization. It was an erasure. They were not just building a resort. They were building a monument to their own egos, and they were using the bones of my hometown as the foundation. The woman who had spent the last 7 years trying to be worthy of this life, this man, this skyline evaporated. The girl who had cried in the bathroom at the party was gone. In her place was someone cold, quiet, and calculating. Someone my grandfather, Raymond Stewart, would have recognized instantly. The question in my mind was no longer, am I good enough for him? The question was, does this arrogant, sheltered man have any idea who he is dealing with? I opened the file I had stared at in the hotel room, the scan of my grandfather's will. Last night, I looked at it with a sense of nostalgic pain. Tonight, I read it with the same cold, predatory focus that Nate applied to a balance sheet. It was not just a random collection of deeds. My grandfather had been a surveyor. He knew the land, the useless scrubland by the highway. It sat directly on top of the town's primary aquifer. The will specified exclusive and originating water rights. You cannot build 3 golf courses and a casino without water. The old flooded quarry. It was the only viable source of aggregate for large-scale concrete construction within 50 miles. The shares in the local agricultural co-op. That co-op held the non-transferable 99-year lease on the grain elevator and the warehouse complex by the railroad tracks. Nate saw a dying town full of simple people. My grandfather had seen a strategic bottleneck, and he had bought every single piece of it. I closed the file. Nate thought I was the small-town girl. He thought he could daze me with a trip to Paris. He was about to find out that a small-town girl, the granddaughter of Raymond Stewart, knew exactly what the land was worth. My grandfather Ray was a man of few words and long walks. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, I'd follow him through the overgrown fields and down the dusty service roads of Maple Ridge. He'd stop, push his hat back, and point with a calloused finger at a patch of weeds or a pile of abandoned tires. See that? Leah, he'd say, his voice rough as gravel. That's junk, but the dirt under it, that's tomorrow. While my father was drowning in debt, Ray was quietly trading favors, paying off back taxes for neighbors, and acquiring land. He never bought the pretty parcels on Main Street. He bought the forgotten pieces. This, he'd say, stopping by the chain-link fence around the flooded quarry, is what's going to save the kids in this town someday. Not the mill, not the government, just this, the land. I never understood. I just thought he liked collecting rocks. Now, sitting in a $1,000 hotel room, I read his will, really read it for the first time, and I finally understood. My grandfather had not been a sentimental collector. He had been a grandmaster-level chess player, and Maple Ridge was his board. The will was not a list of properties. It was a fortress. He owned, outright, the single gas station and convenience store at the junction of the state highway and the main road into town. It was the only place to get gas for 30 miles in any direction. He owned the 120 acres of useless scrubland by the lake. Nate and his friends saw an ugly, overgrown mess. My grandfather, the surveyor, had seen the only plot of land high enough to offer a panoramic view of the entire valley, with the only viable shoreline for development. He owned the old flooded quarry which, as I now knew from my own analytics work, was sitting on a massive aquifer. The document precisely stated that his heir retained all originating water, mineral, and hard rock extraction rights. Nate's wellness resort and its 3 planned golf courses would need water, my water, and then there was the masterpiece. He held a 40% controlling stake in the Maple Ridge Agricultural Cooperative. It sounded small. It sounded like farming. But the co-op, by virtue of a 99-year lease signed in 1952, owned the grain elevator, the massive storage warehouses, and the only functioning railroad spur in the county. Nate wanted to build a casino and a luxury shopping district. He planned to bring in tons of materials and export tons of waste. He could not do it efficiently without rail access. He could not build at scale without the aggregate from my quarry. He could not keep his golf courses green without my water. He could not even get his construction crews into town without stopping at my gas station. I felt a dizzying rush of shame and awe. When he died 5 years ago, I was heartbroken, but I was also busy. I was Leah Harrington, the rising city professional. I was impressing Nate's friends. I had flown in for the funeral, cried at the graveside, and signed the papers Frank Miller put in front of me, barely glancing at them. I had inherited some land back home, and I'd promptly filed the tax documents away. Embarrassed. I had been so desperate to escape Maple Ridge, I had never once bothered to look at what I actually owned. Now, illuminated by the glow of Nate's own Project Maple Ridge proposal, my grandfather's strategy was blindingly clear. This was not a dying town. It was a perfectly constructed strategic bottleneck, and it was mine. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was adrenaline. I needed confirmation. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang 4 times, and a gruff voice answered. No greeting. Miller. Frank. It's Leah. Leah Stewart. I dropped the Harrington instinctively. There was a long silence. Frank Miller had been my grandfather's lawyer for 50 years. He was a terrifying, tobacco-chewing curmudgeon who wore the same tweed jacket every day and had not forgiven my father for his bankruptcy or me for leaving. Well, he finally grunted. Heard you married one of those Chicago fellas. Figured you'd forgotten all about this place. Just like the rest of them. I haven't. Frank, I said, my voice steady. I'm looking at the will, the estate documents. About time, he muttered. I heard some city boys sniffing around. Harrington Capital. I believe. That's your husband, isn't it? Figures. They're loud. They think waving a big check is all it takes. Frank, what they're proposing, it's not good for the town. Course it ain't, he snapped. It's never good for the town. They come in, they gut the place, they put up plastic houses, and they leave when the money's gone. Seen it a dozen times, but they're in for a surprise with this one. The assets. I said, the water rights. The co-op. The assets are ironclad. Frank cut in. Your granddad made sure of that. But that's not even the best part. You remember the Stewart codicil? What I heard him sigh. A sound of profound disappointment in my ignorance. Your granddad. Leah. He knew folks like your husband. He knew they'd come. He put a special clause in the will. Tied it to the deed of every single parcel. It's a first right of refusal and community impact clause. My heart was hammered. What does that mean? It means, Frank said, and I could hear the rare, thin smile in his voice, that if any outside entity, anybody not born in this county, makes a formal offer on any critical infrastructure, the Stewart estate, that's you. Girl has the right to match that offer. But more importantly, it gives you the legal standing to challenge any sale based on negative community impact. It forces them to negotiate, not with the mayor, not with the county, with you. You are the only heir. You are the gatekeeper. I sank onto the edge of the hotel bed. Nate did not just have to buy the assets. He had to buy them from me, or get my explicit legal permission to buy them from anyone else. And he had no idea. A new, cold clarity settled over me. I started to draw on the hotel notepad. Not a doodle, but a plan. I had my inheritance, the land, the water, the infrastructure. I had my own savings, built up from my years at Skyline Orchard, tucked away in an account Nate had never bothered to ask about. And, thanks to Nate, I had access to a significant amount of marital property, if I was smart, if I was fast. I could move before he even knew the game had started. I could use my own funds to scoop up the other key parcels he was targeting, the ones my grandfather had not owned. Before his offers even landed, I could leverage my position as the insider he mocked. The feeling from the rooftop party returned the humiliation, the rage, but it was no longer a fire burning me up from the inside. It was fuel. I realized, the only person in this entire equation who understood both worlds. Nate and his friends saw Maple Ridge as a spreadsheet of cheap assets. I saw the faces, the families, the history. But unlike my family, I also understood Nate. I had spent 7 years in his world. I knew how he thought. I knew how to read his projections. I knew his arrogance was his greatest weakness. I was no longer a victim of a hostile takeover. I was the one person who could stop it. Or better yet, the one person who could take it all. I would have to keep playing the part. I would have to go home, to the penthouse, and be the simple, adorable wife. I would have to nod and look confused by the big numbers, and maybe even cry about my dad's old garage. Just as he'd predicted, I would have to be the small-town girl. It was the best cover I had. I looked at the notepad. It was a web of arrows, asset names, and dollar figures. It was a declaration of war. Nate wanted to turn my home into his personal playground. Fine, if they want to play in my town, I will be the one who sells the tickets. I went home to the penthouse. I played the part. I told Nate I'd had too much to drink at the party and had stayed at a hotel to clear my head. He bought it instantly. He was distracted, energized by his new project, and my small-town girl emotionalism was just static. He had already learned to tune out. "Take the card, buy yourself something nice," he said, tossing his black Amex on the kitchen island. "We're having dinner with the new investors on Friday, so make it something good." I palmed the card. "Okay, Nate." The next morning, I took the train to a different part of the city. I did not go to a boutique. I went to a steel and glass skyscraper on Wacker Drive. I had made one call. The name I requested was whispered in certain Chicago circles. A name synonymous with high stakes, high net worth divorces. She was the person you hired when you did not want a divorce. You wanted a surgically precise dismantling of your spouse's entire life. Her name was Alexis Ward. Her reputation was scorched earth, but elegant. No messy public fights, no leaked tabloid stories, just quiet, catastrophic, financial and legal victory. Her office was on the 33rd floor, a minimalist expanse of white marble, concrete, and glass. There was not a single personal photo, just a massive, abstract painting that looked like a beautiful, expensive bruise. Alexis Ward was in her 50s, rail-thin, with severe black hair and glasses that probably cost more than my first car. She did not offer me coffee or water. She just motioned for me to sit at the vast, empty concrete table. "You have 1 hour, Ms. Harrington," she said, her voice like a dry file. "My paralegal tells me this is urgent. Impress me." I did not cry. I did not get emotional. I had moved past that. I opened my laptop and placed my phone on the table. For 20 minutes, I laid it all out, not as a wife, but as a data analyst. Won the marriage, 7 years, significant shared assets, heavily weighted in his name, prenup, but with a 5-year commingling clause that has now been met. 2. The psychological component, I continued. A consistent, documented pattern of gaslighting and public belittlement. He refers to me as small-town girl and simple to devalue my input and establish a narrative of incompetence. 3. The imminent business venture, Harrington Capital, his fund, is attempting a hostile acquisition of my hometown, Maple Ridge. He is using my personal life story, my family's poverty, as a marketing tool to secure funding for this project. I paused, and for the first time, Alexis looked up from her notes. her eyes sharp. 4. The unknown variable. I turned my laptop around. My inheritance, the will of Raymond Stewart. My husband believes I come from nothing. In reality, I am the gatekeeper. I own the water rights, the key transport infrastructure, and the primary land parcels he needs to even break ground. He does not know this. He has, in fact, committed to his investors without having secured a single one of these assets. I sat back. He thinks he's playing a game of poker, but I'm holding all the aces, and he doesn't even know we're at the same table. Alexis was silent for a full minute. She tapped her pen on her notepad. Finally, she looked at me, and the faintest trace of a smile touched her lips. "Well, Ms. Harrington," she said, "you have not come here for a divorce. You have come here for a leveraged buyout. I like that." She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city. "Here is your situation. You are holding 3 weapons. You must learn to use them all. Weapon 1, your private assets, the Stewart estate. This is your leverage. It is untouchable, non-marital property. It is the fortress from which you will wage this war. Weapon 2, the inside information. You live in his house, you hear his calls, you see his laptop." I started to interrupt, to say I wasn't sure, but she held up a hand. "Do not be naive. He has been using your private life as a business asset for years. The rules of engagement have changed. You are not his wife. You are his primary competitor. You must be meticulous, but you must be careful. We are not breaking the law. We are simply observing." "Weapon 3, she said, turning back to me. "Your image, the very thing he uses to mock you, the simple, small-town girl. This is your greatest camouflage. He is so blinded by his own arrogance. He will never see you as a threat. You must be her, until the very last second." The strategy was laid out with terrifying speed. "First," Alexis said, "you do not leave. You do not file for divorce. You do not even hint at it. You go to that dinner on Friday in a new dress. You smile. You play the part of the placated, simple wife who got handled with a shopping trip. Second, you open a new bank account at a different institution. Today, you establish your own independent line of credit. Today. Third, we move your personal, liquid assets. You mentioned bonuses from your job at Skyline, your grandfather's cash inheritance. We will move that money, all of it perfectly legal and traceable to your premarital or non-marital property status, and we will use it to fund your war chest. Fourth," she said, we need a vessel." "I have a name," I said. "Heartland Revive LLC." Alexis smiled again. "Perfect. Sounds like a folksy, harmless nonprofit. In reality, it will be the holding company for every asset you are about to acquire. This LLC, registered in Delaware and shielded by my firm, will be the entity that begins to buy the other key parcels in Maple Ridge, the ones your grandfather didn't own, but that Nate is currently targeting." "And the evidence?" I asked, gesturing to my phone. "The recordings, the group chats." "This is important. Leah," she said, sitting down. "What do you want? Do you want to go to court and make him pay? Emotionally? Do you want to show a judge that he was cruel to you, that will get you a settlement? It will be messy, and he will paint you as vindictive." She leaned forward. "Or do you want to win? Do you want his assets? Do you want his power? Do you want his entire Maple Ridge project to collapse into his lap, publicly and humiliatingly, while you walk away with the keys to the kingdom?" "I want to win," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Good," Alexis replied. "Then the evidence is not for a judge. It is not about his cruelty. It is about his incompetence. You save those recordings, those messages where he boasts about handling you and calls the locals simple. You save them to prove to his investors, at the opportune moment, that he is a reckless, arrogant fool who failed to do his most basic due diligence. You are not building a divorce case. You are building a corporate takedown." The path was clear. I was not going to run. I was not going to cry. I was going to beat Nate at his own game. I was going to use his money, his arrogance, and his assumptions against him. I would hollow out his entire project from the inside, all while smiling and wearing the new dress he paid for. He thought Maple Ridge was a dying town, and I was a cheap souvenir. He was about to learn that we were the most expensive acquisitions of his life. I spent the next 2 hours in Alexis Ward's office. We opened the accounts. We filed the incorporation papers. We drew up the strategy for approaching the other landowners in Maple Ridge. That afternoon, I signed the document that officially created Heartland Revive LLC. My hand did not shake. It felt like signing a check, closing a deal, but I knew what it was. It was the first time in my life I had ever truly declared war. I waited 1 week. I let the rhythm of our life settle back into its cold, familiar pattern. I went to the dinner on Friday in a $4,000 dress Nate's assistant had picked out. I smiled at the investors. I was the perfect, simple wife. On Monday morning, over espresso, I launched the first move. "Nate," I said, looking out the window, "I think I need to go home for a few days." He glanced up from his tablet, momentarily annoyed by the interruption. "Home to the penthouse. We are home." "No," I said, infusing my voice with a slight quiver. "Home? Maple Ridge? I just need to see my mom. After that party hearing you talk about the project, it just brought up a lot. I feel a little emotional." His expression softened immediately. He understood. This was the predictable, controllable Leah. "Oh, honey, of course. That's a great idea." He put down the tablet. "That's actually perfect." "Perfect." "Yeah," he said, already spinning it. "You go home, see your mom, feel the feelings. It's good. It shows we're connected to the community. You can smooth the way a little. Let people know this is a good thing, that you're on board. It's brilliant. Actually, he thought I was going home to grieve. He was sending me to be his emotional advance team. "I just need to see my mom," I repeated, letting a tear form. "I'll be back in a few days." "Take as long as you need," he said, already texting his approval of my brilliant idea to Logan. "Take the jet. No, wait, that's too flashy. Just fly commercials. It's more authentic." "Okay, Nate." I wiped the single, perfect tear. 2 days later, I drove a rented sedan past the "Welcome to Maple Ridge, population 2,412" sign. The number had not been updated in a decade. It was worse than I remembered. Not tragically beautiful, just tired. The houses on the edge of town had peeling paint and collapsing porches. Main Street was a row of missing teeth, boarded-up storefronts. Faded "For Rent" signs yellowing in the sun. For sale signs were everywhere, staked into lawns like tiny, desperate flags of surrender. My data analyst brain, the part Nate ignored, was humming. This was not decay. It was a fire sale. These were distressed assets, priced to move, and located in a pattern I recognized from my grandfather's map. My mother was waiting on the porch of the same small house I grew up in. She looked thinner, the lines around her eyes deeper, but she lit up when she saw me. "Leah," we sat at the kitchen table, the same Formica table I'd done my homework on. She was happy but anxious. "It's all anyone's talking about," she said, pouring me a cup of coffee. "These rich folks from Chicago. You're Nate. They're coming to buy the town. They say it'll mean jobs, real jobs." She looked at me with a painful, fragile hope. She wanted to believe this was a rescue. "Nate is very excited about the potential." "Mom," I said, hedging, "I'm just here to visit you. And to sort out some of Grandpa Ray's old paperwork." "Oh, that old land," she sighed, dismissing it. "Thank goodness you're here. Maybe you can finally just sell it to your husband and be done with it." "Maybe," I said. "I need to see Frank Miller first." Frank was waiting in his ancient mud-splattered pickup truck outside his dusty office. He had not changed. He just grunted when he saw me and motioned to the passenger seat. "Let's go to war." We drove. We did not talk about Nate. We did not talk about my marriage. We talked about assets. "That's the old warehouse complex," he said, pointing to a sprawling, corrugated steel building near the highway. "Rail spurs right behind it. Co-op's lease is solid, but the building itself is owned by the Henderson brothers. They're broke. They're on your list. I made a note. Heartland Revive will make an offer this afternoon. We drove to the lakefront, the useless scrubland. Nate's people already put an offer on the parcel next to yours, Frank said. They think they can build their resort there. They don't know you own the entire waterfront and the high ground. Good. Let them buy it. We parked on Main Street, a row of 2-story brick buildings, all vacant. These, I said, are Nate's teardowns. He wants to level this whole block for his shopping district. They're all in foreclosure, Frank said. Bank's auctioning them as a bundle next week. No, I said. Heartland Revive is going to buy the bank's note. Today, we're not bidding. We're becoming the bank. Frank gave me a long, appraising look. You got more of your granddad in you than I thought, girl. We started that afternoon, not me. Heartland Revive LLC, represented by Miller Associates. Frank made the calls. The Henderson brothers, desperate to avoid foreclosure, sold the warehouse for 10 cents on the dollar. We acquired the bundled mortgage for the Main Street properties. We started approaching the individual homeowners whose land bordered the quarry, the land Nate would need for access roads. These were people I'd known my whole life. Mrs. Gable, who used to babysit me. Mr. Henderson, who'd taught me to drive. They were tired. They were scared. They'd heard rumors of the City Boys, Nate's acquisition team, coming in with lowball offers and threats of eminent domain. When Frank Miller, their lawyer, showed up and said, Leah Stewart wants to buy your land. She's not going to bulldoze it. She's trying to save her granddad's legacy. The relief was palpable. They signed. They trusted Raymond's granddaughter. They had no idea they were selling to a Delaware corporation that was about to go to war with Harrington Capital. The linchpin was the gas station. It was the only one. My grandfather's first major acquisition. It was currently run by a man named Gus, who had leased it from my family for 20 years. He'd watched me grow up, giving me free Slurpees on hot days. When Frank and I walked in, the bell jangled. Gus was behind the counter, looking exhausted. Leah Stewart, my goodness, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Gus, I said, how are you? Tired, Leah, tired. He gestured to a crisp, laminated offer letter on his counter. Got this yesterday, from some big city fund, Harrington Capital. He did not connect the name. They want to buy my lease out. Good money. More money than I've seen in my life. They want to tear this place down. Put up one of those giant travel plazas. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for an answer. They say it's part of a big resort, a casino. Is that right? That's what they're planning. Gus, I said quietly. I was going to take it, he whispered. What else am I going to do? Gus, I said, leaning on the counter. That fund that's my husband's. His face fell. But he doesn't own this land, I said. I do. Heartland Revive does. And I have a counteroffer. I'm not offering you more money. I'm offering you less. He stared at me, confused. I will renew your lease for another 20 years, at a rate that's half of what you're paying now. I'll front the capital, interest-free, to upgrade your pumps and add a small kitchen. You stay. You run your business. All I ask is one thing. What? You never sell to him. You never sell to any outside fund. This station stays in Maple Ridge. Run by Maple Ridge. Gus looked at Nate's multi-million-dollar buyout offer. Then he looked at me. He had seen the shiny SUVs with Chicago plates driving through town for a week. He'd heard the rumors. He slid Nate's offer into the trash. When do we sign? Leah. I realized something bitter and powerful. These people had been abandoned for so long. They'd lost all faith. They were seconds away from selling their souls for a quick paycheck. But given the choice, even a sliver of one, they would still choose one of their own over the rich strangers who looked at their homes and saw only dollar signs. I spent the next 3 days building my network. I did not tell them the whole truth. I did not need to Sarah, at the town diner. I was Heartland Revive, a fund dedicated to saving Main Street. To the police chief, I was just Ray Stewart's girl, asking about zoning ordinances. To the pastor, I was making a donation to the church's food bank. They all thought I was just a nostalgic, wealthy woman trying to save a few of her grandfather's old properties. They had no idea I was consolidating a monopoly. Last night, I sat with Frank in his office. The big county map was spread out on his desk. It was covered in marker. "The red pins," he said, "are the parcels Nate's team has formally bid on." There were about a dozen. "The blue pins," I said, "are the ones Heartland Revive now owns or controls." The blue pins outnumbered the red 3-1. More importantly, the blue pins surrounded the red pins. They cut them off from the highway. They cut them off from the water. They cut them off from the railroad. Nate's targeted acquisitions were now worthless, isolated islands in a sea of my land. Frank leaned back, a dark, satisfied look on his face. He lit an unfiltered cigarette, filling the room with smoke. "He can't build," I said, tracing the map with my finger. "He can't get materials in. He can't get water. He's trapped." Frank took a long, slow drag. "If those city boys want this town," he rasped, "they're going to have to go through you first." I returned to Chicago and stepped back into the role of Leah Harrington. I was an actress now, and the penthouse was my stage. Nate was delighted to see me. He was in his office, buzzing, a whirlwind of energy. "Honey, you're back," he called out, waving me in. He was on a conference call, but he hit the mute button. "How did it go? Did you know?" "Feel better." I let my shoulders slump. I manufactured the look of exhausted, emotional fragility he expected. "It was hard. Nate, the town looks so tired. Mom, she's just getting older. It was a lot." I know," he said, his voice softening, that patient, patronizing tone. "But see, that's why this project is so important. We're going to bring jobs, life. We're going to fix it." He looked at me, his eyes bright with his own brilliance. "Did you talk to them? Did you help them understand?" "I talked to Mom," I said, looking at the floor. "And a few other people. I think they're just scared of change. But I told them you had a good plan, that you wanted to help." "That's my girl," he said, beaming. He came over and kissed my forehead, a gesture of ownership, of a king rewarding a loyal subject. "My simple, good-hearted girl. You see, you're the key to this whole thing." He was so busy congratulating himself on handling me that he never once asked what I did, who I saw, or what Frank Miller had said. I was not a person to him. I was an emotional problem that had, in his mind, been successfully solved. A few days later, his carelessness gave me the next piece of evidence. He was running late for a meeting, a state of frantic energy that made him sloppy. He'd left his laptop open on the kitchen island, logged in. While he took a 30-second shower, his iMessage was open, a group chat. The name of the chat was Project STF. It took me a second. Small, town, flip, my blood ran cold. I picked up my phone. I told myself what Alexis had said. This is not about cruelty. This is about incompetence. I scrolled. It was Logan, Blake, and Nate. Blake acquisition team is on the ground. Says the locals are so broke they'll roll over for peanuts. Logan. Nate, you sure your wife's family isn't going to get sentimental and chain themselves to a tree? And then Nate's reply. Don't worry about Leah. She's handled. She's my secret weapon. They all trust Ray's granddaughter. She'll keep them in line without even knowing it. I felt the nausea rise. He wasn't just discounting me. He was actively, consciously using me as an unwitting tool to deceive my own town. Then I saw the image. Logan had sent it. It was a photo of my mother's house, the one with the peeling paint and the broken shutter. He had badly photoshopped Nate's face onto the body of a knight in shining armor, holding a bag with a $sign on it. The caption, Sir Nate, Savior of the Poors. My hand was shaking. I scrolled further. Nate had sent them a photo of me from my sophomore year of college, a picture I thought was private. I was in overalls, my hair a frizzy mess, volunteering at a food drive. He had captioned it, "Our official brand ambassador. Heart of gold." I took a picture of the screen. Click, I photographed the memes. Click, I photographed the conversation where they discussed their lowball offer strategy, laughing about how the locals wouldn't know the difference until the checks cleared. Click, click, click. I airdropped the photos to my secure burner phone, deleted them from my own camera roll, and stepped away from the laptop just as I heard the shower turn off. I was not building a case against a husband. I was building a case against a fund manager who held his own investors, his partners, and his target market in complete contempt. This was not marital infidelity. This was professional suicide, and I was just taking notes. The following week, I was required to attend Nate's primary pitch to the second-round investors. These were the old money, conservative types, the ones who needed more than just a good balance sheet. They needed a story. I sat in the front row of the sterile conference room, wearing a modest, cream-colored dress. I was the prop. Nate was magnificent. He was a performer. He moved across the stage, his voice resonant, his charts flawless. He painted a picture of a dying town, a forgotten piece of America, and then he clicked to the next slide. It was a picture of me, a beautiful professional portrait from our wedding. "This project, gentlemen," Nate said, his voice dropping to a somber, emotional tone, "is not just about numbers for me. It is deeply, deeply personal." He paused, gesturing to me in the front row. The investors all turned, their faces respectful, curious. "My wife, Leah, grew up in Maple Ridge. She escaped. She's the classic American dream. She pulled herself up from nothing. With grit and integrity." He looked at me, his eyes shining with false sincerity. "She saw the decay, the hopelessness, the poverty that her own family endured. And when I proposed this project, she was moved. She knew this was a chance to finally give back, to heal that past. We are not just building a resort. Gentlemen, we are restoring hope. Leah is our why." I felt the heat of 20 pairs of eyes on me. I felt the bile rise in my throat. He was spinning my childhood, my father's failure, my mother's exhaustion. He was spinning it all into a touching case study to raise capital. I did what was expected. I looked up at my husband, produced a small, brave, tearful smile, and I nodded. The investors nodded back, satisfied. They loved it. They were not just investing in a casino, they were investing in a love story. They were investing in my story. I went to my own office the next day. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged precision. I walked into my boss David's office and closed the door. "David," I said, "I have an idea for a new data package. It's a high-potential, underserved market. Post-industrial rural revitalization zones." He leaned back, intrigued. "Meaning towns that are half dead." "Meaning towns that look half dead," I corrected, "but are being targeted by large-scale private equity. Think resorts, logistics hubs, data centers. The problem is, these PE firms are flying blind. They're using outdated census data and focusing on sentiment. They're running on arrogance. We can provide the facts. We can sell this package to their competitors, or to the firms themselves, to show them their blind spots. It's niche, Leah. It's a multi-billion-dollar niche," I countered. "And I have the perfect test case, a small town in the Midwest, Maple Ridge. It is the target of a major redevelopment by a Chicago fund. If I can use our tools to model their blind spots, we can create a proprietary product that predicts value where they only see decay." David's eyes lit up. He was a numbers guy. He didn't care about hope. He cared about proprietary. "I love it," he said. "It's predatory. Get the budget. I want a full spectrum analysis. Use your team. I want everything." For the next 2 weeks, I had the full, legal, corporate power of Skyline Orchard Analytics at my disposal. This was not me digging through public records. This was a team of data scientists running queries on logistics routes, supply chain data, demographic shifts, and most importantly, state and federal infrastructure dockets. Nate was so focused on his story, he never bothered to check the real one. I was in my office, late, staring at a screen. When my phone buzzed, it was Sarah, one of my junior analysts. "Leah, you're not going to believe this. You were right about the data being stale. The Harrington Fund, they're working off the current highway map, but I found this. It's finalized, but not yet public." She sent me a file, a 50-page PDF from the Federal Highway Administration. Project U.S. Route 41, Expansion and Rerouting. My heart stopped. It was a 5-year plan. They were moving a major shipping corridor, creating a new 4-lane bypass to avoid the bottleneck of small towns, and the new primary intersection, the new off-ramp. It was scheduled to be built exactly at the edge of the useless scrubland my grandfather had owned, the land Heartland Revive now controlled. Nate's entire project was focused on Main Street, in the center of town. The new highway was going to bypass it completely. His luxury shopping district would be a ghost town, the land he had ignored, the land I owned, the warehouse complex by the tracks, the waterfront property, the gas station. My grandfather's junk was not just the prize, it was the only prize. Nate and his team, with all their millions, had missed the single most important piece of data. I went home to the penthouse. I felt nothing, just a vast, cold emptiness. I started sleeping in the guest room. Nate finally noticed. "Honey, is everything okay? You've been distant. Is this about Maple Ridge again? I thought we handled that." "I'm just stressed." "Nate," I said, not looking at him, "my new project at work is intense. I just need some sleep. Please, don't handle me. I just need space." He backed off, annoyed, but relieved. A stressed wife was easier to deal with than an emotional one. He was too busy celebrating his imminent victory to see the colossal, fatal blind spot he was walking into. That night, I was reading the FHA report again on my tablet. Sitting in the dark kitchen, Nate was in the living room, pacing, on speakerphone with Logan. He sounded frustrated. "I don't know, man," Nate was saying. "The locals are being difficult. Gus at the gas station won't sell his lease. The Henderson brothers suddenly found another buyer for the warehouse. It's messy. Someone is leaking. Someone's getting in their ear." Logan's voice was tinny, sharp. "Is it your wife? Is she getting in the way? I told you this was a bad idea. Mixing family with this." I sat perfectly still. My phone was on the counter. I quietly, carefully, hit the record button. Nate's laugh. It was the rooftop laugh, the laugh that sealed my fate. And now his. "Leah, are you kidding me?" he scoffed. "No, she's stressed about her project and sleeping in the guest room, but she's not a threat. Logan, she's my wife. I love her." He lowered his voice, but the speakerphone caught it all. "But she's a small-town girl. She doesn't have the stomach for this. She doesn't understand the game. She never will." I looked down at the federal report on my screen, the document that proved I had just checkmated his entire operation. I listened to his voice, so full of complete, blinding, beautiful arrogance. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. A small, cold smile touched my lips. This game, I thought, this game is all mine. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was not sent to my Harrington address, but to the private, secure account I had set up with Alexis. The sender was Jordan Hale. I stared at the name. I knew him. He was a junior analyst at Harrington Capital, a quiet kid who always sat in the back during meetings, furiously taking notes. The subject line was empty. The body of the message was 2 short sentences. "Mrs. Harrington, I believe we have a mutual interest in Maple Ridge. I grew up in a town just like it. Your husband's strategy is flawed. Can you meet my blood pressure spiked? Was this a trap? Was Nate testing me?" I forwarded the email to Alexis, who replied in under 60 seconds. "High risk, higher reward. He's inside. Meet him. Public place. No phones." I replied to Jordan from a new, anonymous Proton Mail account. The cafe in the lobby of the Willis Tower. Tomorrow, noon. I'll be reading a red book. I saw him before he saw me. He was early, perched nervously on a stool, scanning the crowd. He looked 25, fresh out of business school, wearing a suit that was one size too large. He was exactly the kind of person Nate would hire and then bully. I sat down across from him and opened the red hardcover I'd brought. He slid into the booth. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, his voice low. He was terrified. "Call me Leah. You have 10 minutes. Okay. He took a shaky breath. "I'm from Oak Haven, Illinois. It's just like Maple Ridge. My dad had a hardware store. We lost it when a big box store came in. I know what these towns are like. Nate, Mr. Harrington, he doesn't—" "What do you mean? His strategy is flawed," I asked, my voice flat, betraying nothing. "It's not a strategy. It's an ego trip," Jordan said, speaking faster now. "He's not just ignoring community blowback. He's counting on it. He thinks it makes him look tough to the board. The deal, it's leveraged to hell. He's using debt to cover almost 60% of the acquisition, promising the investors a 30% return in 18 months. That's insane. It's not development. It's a strip mine." He was just a kid, but he was smart. He saw what Nate, in his arrogance, refused to see. You cannot build a sustainable project on a foundation of contempt. "Why come to me, Jordan?" I asked. "This is a good way to get fired." "Because he's using you," he blurted out. "And I don't think you know the extent of it. And because when this whole thing blows up, and it will blow up, it's going to take the whole fund with it. I have stock options. I don't want to die with him." Pragmatism, not heroism. I respected that. "I know he's using my story," I said, testing him. "You don't just know," he said, shaking his head. "It is the story, the only one. The prospectus he's circulating is the official one. You're on page 3. The Harrington Pledge, a personal commitment to American renewal. It's all there. Your childhood, your family. He's selling you." He paused, leaning closer. "That's not the flawed part. He's lying to them." My focus sharpened. "Lying how?" "In the risk assessment section, he's actively misrepresenting the status of key assets. He lists the water rights, the quarry, and the rail spur as pending local approvals, or currently in negotiation with municipal entities. He's making it sound like it's just a matter of paperwork. He doesn't mention a rival holding company. He doesn't mention an estate with superseding legal claims. He's concealing the single greatest risk to the entire project." He was concealing me. "He thinks," Jordan whispered, "he can just bully the small-town hicks into selling, and that by the time the investors find out, the deal will be done." I looked at this nervous young man, a whistleblower driven by self-preservation. "What do you want, Jordan?" "An exit," he said. "When this goes nuclear, I want to be on the right side of it. I want a recommendation. I want to be seen as the guy who tried to flag the risk." "All right," I said, closing my book. "Here's the deal. I can't promise you a job, but I can promise you won't get hit by the shrapnel." I didn't tell him about Heartland Revive. I didn't tell him I owned the town. I didn't need to. "I have my own plan," I said. "It's already in motion. Nate is going to fail. You're right about that. Keep feeding me the internal timeline. Any changes to the prospectus, any investor meetings. In return, I will make sure that when the time comes, it's clear to everyone involved that you were the one sane man in the room. Now go, before someone sees us." He nodded, relief flooding his face, and practically ran from the cafe. I went straight to Alexis's office. I laid it all out. She listened, her face like stone. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet. "This is the kill shot. He hasn't just been cruel. He's been reckless. He's breached his fiduciary duty. He lied to his partners." "So we send the prospectus to the board?" I asked. "No," Alexis said, a thin, sharp smile playing on her lips. "That's not elegant. They'll circle the wagons. They'll bury him quietly. No, you don't hit a man like Nate when he's in his office. You hit him when he's on stage. You hit him in front of everyone. You let his own arrogance be the weapon. The plan crystallized. We wait, Alexis said. He's going to have a big event, a final pitch, a signing, something to show off to his investors. He will, without question, have you there as his prop, his why. And then, Alexis said, you stop being the prop. You will be introduced. You will stand up, and you will, very calmly and with supporting documents, inform his partners and his investors that he has been lying to them for 6 months. You won't present as the angry wife. You'll present as the majority shareholder of Heartland Revive LLC, the actual owner of the assets he has failed to secure. We would not be stopping the project. We would be seizing it, while I played the waiting game in Chicago. Frank was waging the ground war in Maple Ridge. He was not subtle, but he was brilliant. He did not need to bribe anyone. He just needed to use the town's existing, sleepy bureaucracy as a weapon. He petitioned the town council for an emergency session. He, as the representative of Heartland Revive LLC, a community-focused preservation fund, proposed 2 new ordinances. First, an update to the town's historic preservation code. It expanded the historic designation from 2 buildings to the entire 3-block span of Main Street. This meant any proposed demolition like Nate's teardown plan would have to go through a 9-month review, public hearings, and approval from a board that Frank had just stacked with his own people. Second, a community impact review ordinance. Any new business applying for a liquor or gaming license, say, a casino would have to prove it would not negatively impact the established character of the town. The final vote on that review, the town council, the council that now viewed Heartland Revive as its savior, these were legal, public, and passed unanimously. Frank had, in a single evening, made Nate's entire business model impossible unless he partnered with the one entity that had the council's blessing, Heartland Revive. Nate was beginning to feel the walls close in, even if he couldn't see them. "This is insane," he snarled, pacing the penthouse. He wasn't talking to me. He was just venting, using me as a soundboard. "The mayor is stalling. He's citing some new zoning bullshit. My acquisition guys are getting stonewalled. Every time they make an offer on a key parcel, the owner says, 'Sorry, we just sold it to another buyer.' What other buyer? There is no other buyer." I looked up from my laptop, widening my eyes in that perfect, simple girl way. "Oh, honey, that sounds awful. Who could it be?" "I don't know," he snapped. "Well," I offered. "You know people in small towns are funny. They don't like being pushed around. Maybe they just don't like your guys. Maybe they just want to decide for themselves." He stopped pacing. He looked at me, his frustration softening into that familiar, condescending pity. "You're right. You're probably right. They're just simple, emotional. They're slowing down their own payday because their feelings are hurt. God, that's such a small town." He had swallowed my explanation whole. His arrogance was my greatest shield. He was right about one thing, though. The pressure was on. He had to show his investors that he had control, that this was all just a minor hiccup. The email landed in my inbox 2 days later. It was not just to me. It was to his entire investor list, his partners, and a curated list of financial press. The subject invitation, "The Future of Maple Ridge, a Harrington Capital Field Trip." "To our valued partners," it read, "the time for speculation is over. The time for building is here. Please join me for an on-the-ground tour and formal commitment ceremony in Maple Ridge. We will meet the community, see the potential firsthand, and formally announce our timeline. And of course, you will hear from the project's inspiration, my wife, Leah Harrington." I was scheduled to speak. He was handing me the microphone. I turned to Nate, who was watching me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled, the simple, supportive, proud wife smile. "Nate, this is wonderful. I'll be there. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, honey," he said, patting my head. I know you won't. I hit accept. The trap was set. The day of the field trip was pure performance art, directed by my husband. Main Street had been power washed. Someone had even planted new flowers in the cracked municipal planters. A massive vinyl banner, hung crookedly between two lampposts, flapped in the morning breeze. Future site of the Maple Ridge Luxury Village, a Harrington Capital project. It was a lie. Strung up in cheap vinyl, the townspeople, my people, gathered on the sidewalks, their arms crossed. They were not celebratory, they were wary. A mix of desperate hope and profound suspicion. They were here to see the circus. Then the circus arrived. A procession of identical, gleaming black Escalades slid to a stop in front of the diner. It was the quietest, most menacing sound Maple Ridge had probably ever heard. The doors opened, and they spilled out Nate, in the lead, wearing a horribly expensive quarter-zip sweater, trying to look like a man of the people. Logan and Blake, flanking him like overgroomed bodyguards, their city shoes already dusty, a handful of older, stern-faced men in tailored blazers, the real money, the investors, and but, to my surprise, 2 or 3, painfully young, painfully hip, financial influencers, their phones already out, filming their own reflections in the diner's dark window. A drone whined to life, ascending to capture the historic moment. I was with them. I had ridden in the lead car with Nate. I was dressed for the part he'd cast me in: dark jeans, leather boots, a simple cashmere sweater. The small-town girl, upgraded but still authentic, the perfect bridge between his world and this one. He'd even told me to look a little overwhelmed. For the cameras, I stepped out of the SUV and took a deep, theatrical breath of home, just as he'd coached me. "All right, everyone," Nate boomed, clapping his hands together. He was on stage. He gestured expansively, as if he'd built the town himself. "Welcome to Maple Ridge. Welcome to the future." I let him lead. I faded to the background, just another face in the entourage. He launched into his speech, a well-rehearsed symphony of bullshit, standing right there on the cracked pavement. "We are here to announce more than just a project," he proclaimed. "We are here to announce a partnership. We are going to bring jobs, good-paying, sustainable, 21st-century jobs." I saw Gus, the gas station owner, narrow his eyes. He knew what a real job looked like. "We are going to invest in your infrastructure. We're going to build better schools. We're going to give your children a reason to stay in Maple Ridge, not run from it." My mother was standing near the back, by the post office. I saw her wince. She was proud of me for leaving. Nate had just, in one sentence, insulted her entire life's sacrifice. "We are going to take this beautiful, historic, but let's be honest, fading town, and we are going to make it a destination." A destination for who? For Logan and Blake, for the men in blazers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I scanned the crowd. My people, I saw them all. My mother looked confused and small. Gus, his arms crossed, his face like thunder. Sarah, the diner owner, nervously wiping her hands on her apron. The mayor, Richard Allen, looked pale and sweaty in his ill-fitting suit. The police chief, the high school principal, they were all here. They didn't know the details of my plan. Frank and I had kept the circle tight. They only knew what Frank had told them. "Come to the meeting. Listen, let the city folks talk. Leah Stewart has a plan." They were putting their trust in me, and they didn't even know what they were trusting me with. Nate finished with a flourish and opened the floor to questions, gesturing to the small cluster of local press he'd invited. A young woman from the Maple Ridge Monitor, the weekly paper, raised her hand. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice clear. "You talk about partnership, but our county records show that a significant portion of the land you've outlined in your proposal, specifically the lakefront, the old quarry, and the highway access routes, are still controlled by the estate of Raymond Stewart. Have you successfully negotiated with his heir, because those rights are considered primary?" The air went still. The drone seemed to pause overhead. Nate's smile froze. It was a tiny, fractional slip. But I saw it. I saw the sudden panic in his eyes. He had assumed, with such breathtaking arrogance, that he was the one who would introduce me, his wife, the Stewart heir, into the narrative. He never imagined my grandfather's name would be thrown at him as a legal obstacle by the press. He recovered quickly, but the damage was done. He laughed, a forced, hollow sound. That's actually the most beautiful part of this story. He turned, searching for me, and dramatically pulled me to his side, his arm locking around my waist. The Stewart family, my family, is completely supportive. He beamed at the reporter. Raymond Stewart's heir isn't just an obstacle. She's my inspiration, my wife, Leah. The cameras all swung to me. The investors all turned to me. I was, for a moment, the center of the universe. I looked at the reporter, I looked at Nate, and I smiled. It was a small, quiet, unreadable smile. I did not nod. I did not shake my head. I said nothing. I just smiled. The reporter looked confused. The investors looked curious. Nate's arm tightened around my waist. A silent, furious command to play along. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jordan Hale. He was standing near the investors, holding a tablet, pretending to take notes. He was watching Nate's face, documenting the micro-expressions of panic. He was my witness. "Great question," Nate boomed, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "Now, if you'll all follow me, I want to show you the crown jewel." He led the procession, his grip still on my arm, marching us down the street and onto the overgrown dirt path that led to the lakefront, my grandfather's land. He had a portable projector and a screen set up. It was absurd. He stood there, on the muddy shore where I used to catch frogs, and clicked a button. A sleek, glass and steel resort appeared on the screen. "This," he said, "is where it all happens. The 5-star hotel, the wellness center, the 18-hole golf course, all with this billion-dollar view." He was magnificent. I had to give him that. He was selling a fantasy with all his heart. He was selling them a vision of a place that did not exist, on land he did not own, with water rights he could not access, and a highway route that was about to make it all obsolete. I stepped back, melting into the crowd, letting him have the full, unfiltered spotlight. He needed to be at the absolute peak of his hubris for this to work. And then, Logan made his move. He was standing next to one of the older, skeptical investors, a man named Mr. Davies. Logan, in his infinite, simple-minded arrogance, thought he was helping. He thought he was being charming. He clapped Davies on the back. "See what I tell you," Logan joked, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air. "Nate's a genius. He comes here, finds this diamond in the rough." He gestured toward me, where I stood by the trees. "We'll buy her little town, and maybe we'll rebrand her, too." He laughed. Silence. The handful of locals who had followed the tour Gus, Sarah, my mother, they all heard it. They had been wary. Now, they were hostile. Their faces, which had been pinched with doubt, now hardened with contempt. I saw Gus take a half-step forward before Frank Miller, standing nearby, put a hand on his arm. It was a fatal, unforced error. Logan had just said the quiet part out loud. He had confirmed their worst fear that they were not partners. They were products, that I was not an inspiration. I was a brand. The investors heard it, too. Mr. Davies did not laugh. He looked at Logan with a sudden, cold disgust. He looked over at me. He looked at Nate, who was frantically trying to talk over the sudden, heavy silence. The air had turned sour. The investors were exchanging glances. The silent, rapid-fire communication of men who smell a bad deal. They could feel the instability. They could feel contempt. And contempt is bad for business. Nate knew he was losing them. He clapped his hands, his smile looking more like a grimace. "All right. Enough of the fresh air. Let's make this official." The mayor, Richard Allen, stepped forward, wiping his palms on his trousers. He looked like he was about to be sick. He'd been coached by Frank. Yes," the mayor stammered. reading from a note card. Harrington Capital has requested a formal event to sign a memorandum of understanding with the town. We will convene for this public signing this afternoon at 3 p.m. at the town hall. He looked at his card again. This signing will be to formalize the partnership. All key landowner representatives have been invited to be present. Nate clapped, beaming, grabbing the spotlight back. This is it. Gentlemen, the official signing, this is where we make history. He genuinely, truly, believed he was the main event. He thought the key landowner was the mayor, a man he'd been bullying for weeks. He thought this was his victory lap. He turned and strode toward the SUVs, the investors following with a new, hesitant energy. I stayed behind for a moment, letting them pass. Frank caught my eye. He gave me one. Slow, imperceptible nod. The stage was set, the audience was seated, and Nate had just handed me the microphone. The town hall at 3 p.m. was not just full. It was suffocating. It smelled like old wood varnish, dust, and the sharp, coppery scent of collective anxiety. Every seat was taken. The back rows were packed with locals, my mother, Gus from the gas station, Sarah from the diner, their faces grim and unreadable. The front rows were for the money, the investors, looking impatient, and the local press, smelling blood. At the long table at the front, Nate sat in the center, flanked by Logan and Blake. He looked triumphant, a king accepting the surrender of a new territory. The vinyl banner from Main Street had been moved inside, hanging behind him like a backdrop. I sat in the front row, on the aisle, my hands folded in my lap. I was invisible. I was the prop. Mayor Allen, his face slick with sweat, tapped the microphone, a shrill feedback making everyone wince. We are gathered today," he stammered, "to sign a memorandum of understanding regarding the Harrington Capital project." Nate beamed, nodding at the investors. "To formalize this," the mayor continued, reading from his note card, "we have asked the principal stakeholders and landowners to be present for the signing," he tested, representing the Maple Ridge Gas Go Gus. Gus, in the back, crossed his arms and did not move. Representing the Maple Ridge Agricultural Cooperative, Mr. Frank Miller. Frank, beside me, nodded once, his face like granite. Representing the waterfront parcels. The mayor paused, took a deep breath, and looked at his card one last time. And representing Heartland Revive LLC, which now holds the majority interest in the Raymond Stewart estate and all other critical parcels, Ms. Leah Stewart. The sound in the room died. Every head, as one, swiveled. The investors, the press, the locals, and Nate. His smile did not fade. It shattered. It fell off his face. I stood up. I walked past the stunned investors. I walked onto the low stage and took the empty seat at the table, placing my own slim folder in front of me. Nate was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. "Leah," his voice was a choked, horrified whisper, audible only to me. "What is this? What are you doing?" I turned to him. My voice was just as quiet, but it was not choked. It was cold. "You said I was a small-town girl, Nate, so I came home to play with my small town." I leaned forward to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone." My voice was clear and steady, amplified, filling the room. "My name is Leah Stewart." I let the name hang in the air for a beat, separating it from Harrington forever. "I am the sole heir of the Raymond Stewart estate. I am also the founder and managing director of Heartland Revive LLC. For the past 4 months," I continued, "Heartland Revive has been quietly acquiring the primary strategic assets of this town. This includes, but is not limited to, the county's sole originating water and aquifer rights, the railroad spur and adjoining warehouse complex, the Main Street Historic Commercial District, and the highway-adjacent lakefront property that Mr. Harrington is so fond of. Jordan, if you would—" In the back of the room, by the projector, Jordan Hale hit a key. The screen behind Nate, which had been showing the Luxury Village logo, flickered to life. It was a map. "This," I said, is the current state of play. The parcels marked in red are the ones Harrington Capital has publicly targeted. The parcels marked in blue are the ones I own. The map was a sea of blue. Nate's red parcels were tiny, isolated, worthless islands, cut off from water, rails, and roads. A wave of sound rippled through the room, a gasp from the locals, and a sharp, angry, indrawn breath from the investors. Mr. Davies, the older, skeptical investor, stood up. His voice was not loud, but it was lethal. "Mr. Harrington, what is the meaning of this?" Nate was chalk white. He looked from the map to me, to Davies. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Your prospectus, sir," Davies continued, "which I have right here, lists these exact assets, water, rail, land, as pending municipal negotiation. You failed to disclose that they were already owned, in their entirety, by a competing private entity, an entity run by your wife." Nate was trapped. I had seen this moment in my mind 1,000 times. If he said he knew, he was guilty of securities fraud. If he said he did not know, he was the single most incompetent fund manager in the city of Chicago. "I believe this is the section Mr. Davies is referring to," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension. I held up my own copy of the prospectus. Page 12, Risk Assessment, Water Rights Pending Municipal Review. This, gentlemen, is not just an error, it is a material misrepresentation. Those rights were never municipal. They have been held privately by the Stewart estate for 50 years. Here, Jordan clicked again, is the public charter for Heartland Revive LLC, filed in Delaware 3 months ago. Assuming control of those rights, your entire project, the one you have raised millions for, is non-viable. This is ridiculous. Logan suddenly jumped to his feet, his face a blotchy red. "This is just a family spat. It's a misunderstanding, Nate. Tell them—" "This isn't a misunderstanding. Logan," I said, my eyes locking on him. "It is a fundamental failure of due diligence, a failure rooted in a corporate culture of contempt." I nodded to Jordan. The slide changed. The screen was filled with screenshots. The Project STF group chat. The memes. The photo of my mother's house. Blake's text, "The locals are so broke they'll roll over for peanuts." And Logan's own words, the ones from the lakefront, now immortalized on the screen, "We'll buy her little town, and maybe we'll rebrand her too." The room went absolutely dead silent. The press cameras flashed. A sudden volley of pops. The locals stared, their faces dark with a cold, validated fury. Mr. Davies looked at Nate, his expression one of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Mr. Harrington, all discussion of a memorandum is terminated. You can expect to hear from our legal counsel regarding your fraudulent prospectus. We are done here." The investors stood as one. They gathered their things and walked out of the town hall, not even glancing at Nate, the mayor. Seizing the moment, rushed to the microphone. "In light of this disturbing information, the town of Maple Ridge will only be working with partners who have demonstrated a long-term, respectful commitment to this community." He looked directly at me. "Partners like Heartland Revive." Nate, moving faster than I had ever seen him, grabbed my arm and yanked me out the side door, into the empty linoleum-floored hallway. His face was a mask of sheer panic. "Leah, stop this. What are you doing? You're destroying me. You're destroying us." I just looked at him. "It was stressful," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "It was just a joke. Logan is an idiot. We can fix this. We can run this together." He gripped my shoulders. "We'll split it. You want 60%, 70. What do you want? Leah, just tell me what you want." I looked at the man I had once been so desperate to impress. "Did you ever, even once," I asked, my voice soft, "think that I understood this game better than you?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the slim folder, the one Alexis Ward had prepared. I handed it to him. "It's a divorce settlement." He stared at it, uncomprehending. It's generous, all things considered. It lets you keep the penthouse and your personal funds. In exchange, you sign over all claims to any shared marital assets tied to my work at Skyline, and you never contest Heartland's acquisitions. It is a clean, quiet break. Leah, he whispered, his entire body sagging. Please. You told your friends I was a small-town girl. Nate, easy to control. I looked him right in the eye. Today, I just proved a small-town girl knows how to buy the whole damn town. The rest, if you want to keep any shred of your reputation from those investors, you'll sign the papers. He looked past me, through the doorway, back into the room. It was over. Jordan Hale was in deep, animated conversation with Mr. Davies, who had apparently not left. My mother, Gus, and Sarah were coming toward me, their faces not triumphant, but relieved. Gus clasped my other hand. Thank you. Leah, thank you. The mayor was giving an impassioned interview to the Monitor about a new generation of ownership, born right here. I turned my back on my husband. I left him standing alone in the hallway, holding the end of his life. I walked back into the town hall, surrounded by my people. I stood on the front steps, breathing in the cold, clear Midwest air. I watched as two men in work boots tore down Nate's vinyl banner. The future site was gone. They replaced it with a temporary hand-painted plywood sign. Maple Ridge, owned by the people who live here, and in the bottom corner, in small, neat letters, Heartland Revive, Leah Stewart. I smiled. It was not a smile of revenge. It was the smile of a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of being told her value, set the price herself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Where are you tuning in from? I would love to hear from you. So please drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and let's connect. Subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories and like this video. If you want more stories like this one to be heard, please consider supporting us by hitting that hype button.